Chapter 2 of the Circular Staircase. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Laurie Ann Walden. The Circular Staircase by Mary Roberts Rinehart. Chapter 2. A Link Cuff Button. Liddy's knees seemed to give way under her. Without a sound she sank down, leaving me staring at the window in petrified amazement. Liddy began to moan under her breath, and in my excitement I reached down and shook her. "Stop it!" I whispered. "It's only a woman, maybe a maid of the Armstrongs. Get up and help me find the door." She groaned again. "Very well," I said. "Then I'll have to leave you here. I'm going." She moved at that, and, holding to my sleeve, we felt our way, with numerous collisions, to the billiard room, and from there to the drawing room. The lights came on then, and with the long French windows unshuttered, I had a creepy feeling that each one sheltered a peering face. In fact, in the light of what happened afterward, I am pretty certain we were under surveillance during the entire ghostly evening. We hurried over the rest of the locking up and got upstairs as quickly as we could. I left the lights all on, and our footsteps echoed cavernously. Liddy had a stiff neck the next morning from looking back over her shoulder, and she refused to go to bed. "Let me stay in your dressing-room, Miss Rachel," she begged. "If you don't, I'll sit in the hall outside the door. I'm not going to be murdered with my eyes shut." "If you're going to be murdered," I retorted, "it won't make any difference whether they are shut or open. But you may stay in the dressing-room if you will lie on the couch. When you sleep in a chair, you snore." She was too far gone to be indignant, but after a while she came to the door and looked in to where I was composing myself for sleep, with Drummond's Spiritual Life. "That wasn't a woman, Miss Rachel," she said, with her shoes in her hand. "It was a man in a long coat." "What woman was a man?" I discouraged her without looking up, and she went back to the couch. It was 11 o'clock when I finally prepared for bed. In spite of my assumption of indifference, I locked the door into the hall, and finding the transom did not catch, I put a chair cautiously before the door—it was not necessary to rouse Liddy—and climbing up, put on the ledge of the transom a small dressing mirror so that any movement of the frame would send it crashing down. Then, secure in my precautions, I went to bed. I did not go to sleep at once. Liddy disturbed me just as I was getting drowsy, by coming in and peering under the bed. She was afraid to speak, however, because of her previous snubbing, and went back, stopping in the doorway to sigh dismally. Somewhere downstairs a clock with a chime sang away the hours: 11:30, 45, 12. And then the lights went out to stay. The Casanova Electric Company shuts up shop and goes home to bed at midnight. When one has a party, I believe it is customary to fee the company, which will drink hot coffee and keep awake a couple of hours longer. But the lights were gone for good that night. Liddy had gone to sleep, as I knew she would. She was a very unreliable person, always awake and ready to talk when she wasn't wanted, and dozing off to sleep when she was. I called her once or twice, the only result being an explosive snore that threatened her very windpipe. Then I got up and lighted a bedroom candle. My bedroom and dressing-room were above the big living room on the first floor. On the second floor a long corridor ran the length of the house, with rooms opening from both sides. In the wings were small corridors crossing the main one. The plan was simplicity itself. And just as I got back into bed I heard a sound from the east wing, apparently, that made me stop, frozen, with one bedroom slipper half off, and listen. It was a rattling metallic sound, and it reverberated along the empty halls like the crash of doom. It was for all the world as if something heavy, perhaps a piece of steel, had rolled clattering and jangling down the hardwood stairs leading to the card-room. In the silence that followed, Liddy stirred and snored again. I was exasperated. First she kept me awake by silly alarms, then when she was needed she slept like Joe Jefferson or Rip—they are always the same to me. I went in and aroused her, and I give her credit for being wide awake the minute I spoke. "Get up," I said, "if you don't want to be murdered in your bed." "Where? How?" she yelled vociferously, and jumped up. "There's somebody in the house," I said. "Get up. We'll have to get to the telephone." "Not out in the hall!" she gasped. "Oh, Miss Rachel, not out in the hall!" trying to hold me back. But I am a large woman, and Liddy is small. We got to the door somehow, and Liddy held a brass andiron which it was all she could do to lift, let alone brain anybody with. I listened and, hearing nothing, opened the door a little and peered into the hall. It was a black void, full of terrible suggestion, and my candle only emphasized the gloom. Liddy squealed and drew me back again, and as the door slammed, the mirror I had put on the transom came down and hit her on the head. That completed our demoralization. It was some time before I could persuade her she had not been attacked from behind by a burglar, and when she found the mirror smashed on the floor she wasn't much better. "There's going to be a death!" she wailed. "Oh, Miss Rachel, there's going to be a death!" "There will be," I said grimly, "if you don't keep quiet, Liddy Allen." And so we sat there until morning, wondering if the candle would last until dawn, and arranging what trains we could take back to town. If we had only stuck to that decision and gone back before it was too late. The sun came finally, and from my window I watched the trees along the drive take shadowy form, gradually lose their ghost-like appearance, become gray, and then green. The Greenwood Club showed itself a dab of white against the hill across the valley, and an early robin or two hopped around in the dew. Not until the milk boy and the sun came, about the same time, did I dare to open the door into the hall and look around. Everything was as we had left it. Trunks were heaped here and there, ready for the trunk room, and through an end window of stained glass came a streak of red and yellow daylight that was eminently cheerful. The milk boy was pounding somewhere below, and the day had begun. Thomas Johnson came ambling up the drive about 6:30, and we could hear him clattering around on the lower floor, opening shutters. I had to take Liddy to her room upstairs, however. She was quite sure she would find something uncanny. In fact, when she did not, having now the courage of daylight, she was actually disappointed. Well, we did not go back to town that day. The discovery of the small picture fallen from the wall of the drawing-room was quite sufficient to satisfy Liddy that the alarm had been a false one, but I was anything but convinced. Allowing for my nerves, and the fact that small noises magnify themselves at night, there was still no possibility that the picture had made the series of sounds I heard. To prove it, however, I dropped it again. It fell with a single muffled crash of its wooden frame, and incidentally ruined itself beyond repair. I justified myself by reflecting that if the Armstrongs chose to leave pictures in unsafe positions and to rent a house with a family ghost, the destruction of property was their responsibility, not mine. I warned Liddy not to mention what had happened to anybody, and telephoned to town for servants. Then, after a breakfast which did more credit to Thomas's heart than his head, I went on a short tour of investigation. The sounds had come from the east wing, and not without some qualms I began there. At first I found nothing. Since then I have developed my powers of observation, but at that time I was a novice. The small card room seemed undisturbed. I looked for footprints, which is, I believe, the conventional thing to do, although my experience has been that as clues both footprints and thumb marks are more useful in fiction than in fact. But the stairs in that wing offered something. At the top of the flight had been placed a tall wicker hamper, packed with linen that had come from town. It stood at the edge of the top step, almost barring passage, and on the step below it was a long, fresh scratch. For 3 steps the scratch was repeated, gradually diminishing, as if some object had fallen, striking each one. Then, for 4 steps, nothing. On the 5th step below was a round dent in the hard wood. That was all, and it seemed little enough, except that I was positive the marks had not been there the day before. It bore out my theory of the sound, which had been for all the world like the bumping of a metallic object down a flight of steps. The 4 steps had been skipped. I reasoned that an iron bar, for instance, would do something of the sort, strike 2 or 3 steps, end down, then turn over, jumping a few stairs and landing with a thud. Iron bars, however, do not fall downstairs in the middle of the night alone. Coupled with the figure on the veranda, the agency by which it climbed might be assumed. But, and here was the thing that puzzled me most, the doors were all fastened that morning, the windows unmolested, and the particular door from the card room to the veranda had a combination lock of which I held the key and which had not been tampered with. I fixed on an attempt at burglary as the most natural explanation, an attempt frustrated by the falling of the object, whatever it was, that had roused me. 2 things I could not understand: how the intruder had escaped with everything locked, and why he had left the small silver which, in the absence of a butler, had remained downstairs overnight. Under pretext of learning more about the place, Thomas Johnson led me through the house and the cellars without result. Everything was in good order and repair. Money had been spent lavishly on construction and plumbing. The house was full of conveniences, and I had no reason to repent my bargain, save the fact that, in the nature of things, night must come again. And other nights must follow, and we were a long way from a police station. In the afternoon a hack came up from Casanova with a fresh relay of servants. The driver took them with a flourish to the servants' entrance and drove around to the front of the house where I was awaiting him. $2, he said in reply to my question. I don't charge full rates because, bringing 'em up all summer as I do, it pays to make a special price. When they got off the train, I says I, there's another bunch for Sunnyside, cook, parlor maid, and all. Yes'm, 6 summers, and a new lot never less than once a month. They won't stand for the country and the lonesomeness, I reckon. But with the presence of the bunch of servants my courage revived, and late in the afternoon came a message from Gertrude that she and Halsey would arrive that night at about 11 o'clock, coming in the car from Richfield. Things were looking up, and when Beulah, my cat, a most intelligent animal, found some early catnip on a bank near the house and rolled in it in a feline ecstasy, I decided that getting back to nature was the thing to do. While I was dressing for dinner, Liddy rapped at the door. She was hardly herself yet, but privately I think she was worrying about the broken mirror and its augury more than anything else. When she came in she was holding something in her hand, and she laid it on the dressing table carefully. "I found it in the linen hamper," she said. "It must be Mr. Halsey's, but it seems queer how it got there." It was the half of a link cuff button of unique design, and I looked at it carefully. "Where was it? In the bottom of the hamper?" I asked. "On the very top," she replied. "It's a mercy it didn't fall out on the way." When Liddy had gone I examined the fragment attentively. I had never seen it before, and I was certain it was not Halsey's. It was of Italian workmanship, and consisted of a mother-of-pearl foundation, encrusted with tiny seed pearls, strung on horsehair to hold them. In the center was a small ruby. The trinket was odd enough, but not intrinsically of great value. Its interest for me lay in this: Liddy had found it lying in the top of the hamper which had blocked the east wing stairs. That afternoon the Armstrongs' housekeeper, a youngish, good-looking woman, applied for Mrs. Ralston's place, and I was glad enough to take her. She looked as though she might be equal to a dozen of Liddy, with her snapping black eyes and heavy jaw. Her name was Anne Watson, and I dined that evening for the first time in 3 days. End of Chapter 2.